Thank you for joining. The webinar will begin in about 1 minute.
Okay, I think I'll get going. I want to welcome everybody to the Bend Chamber of Commerce Impact webinar. And today's topic is just an update on the COVID vaccine, something I know a lot of my friends and colleagues are talking about these days. Today we have 3 different panelists that are going to walk through several issues around how the vaccines are rolling out, how they're working, and some of the issues around that. And we have first up, Dr. Cynthia Marie. She is the infectious disease specialist at St. Charles Health System. And we have Nahad Sadr-Azodi. He's the director of public health for Deschutes County. And then our dear Emily Freeland, again, from the environmental health specialist for Deschutes County as well. All 3 of these folks are here to answer questions today. And they're going to start with a brief presentation so we can consume that information. I'll be monitoring the Q&A box on your screen down at the bottom. Don't use the chat function. The Q&A is where I'll be looking for your questions at the end of the program. And I know this is going to be a jam-packed webinar today, so I want to get started. But first, I want to thank our sponsor, Ben Broadband, for bringing this series to you. And we're very, very pleased to be able to do that for free. And we thank our sponsor, Ben Broadband, again, for making that happen. Just a reminder, we do have upcoming webinars here in the next month or so. We're working with Senator Wyden and Senator Merkley's staff to hopefully bring them on board sometime in March to talk about several issues. The hopefully upcoming new relief package from the Biden administration that's in play right now, an update to the PPP and those loans that are out to businesses. Also, a couple of other issues that might come on later on in the summer, like a potential economic stimulus package that includes infrastructure and other questions and legislation that the 2 senators are working on. And we're also going to be taking a look in about a month about the last year in Central Oregon as we've all lived through this pandemic. Where do we stand as far as an economy? Who's more impacted in what industries than others? And what does the future potentially look like? So we'll be hosting that next month as well. So with that, I'd like to get going on our program this morning, or actually it's afternoon. And we're going to start with Dr. Cynthia Marie. She is going to talk about the development of the different vaccines, how they work, updates on what we're learning as they're being rolled out, and any other information she may want to share, including potential side effects and what those mean. And so, Dr. Marie, we are so grateful for you being here today, and we're really anxious to hear what you have to say. So I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's wonderful to be at this place in the pandemic where we get to talk about vaccines and hopefully our way out of this pandemic. I'm going to start sharing with you my slides. All right, so thanks again for allowing me to come to talk to you about this really awesome place that we are in the pandemic, where we're starting to talk about vaccines. The 2 vaccines that we currently have that we're using here in Deschutes County are the messenger RNA vaccines, the Pfizer and Moderna. These vaccines are teaching our cells how to make a harmless piece of spike protein for the SARS-CoV-2. These cells then display the spike protein on the surface and trigger your immune response to create antibodies to the virus. They do not use the live virus, so they can't cause COVID-19 itself, and they cannot give someone COVID-19. They do not affect or interact with your DNA in any way. I have a schematic here, which some of you may have seen before. And what I love about this one is it's not overly complicated or overly simple. It does really show you the elegance of this vaccine mechanism, where you have the vaccine particle up here at the top, and it's the mRNA is wrapped in a lipid protection, much like a soap bubble, to allow it to remain stable. It then goes to the antigen presenting cell and integrates with the cell. The cell, it uses the cell's own translating machinery to create the spike protein. Once they create 3 spikes, this creates the larger spike protein and gets presented onto the surface of the cell. This is what your antigens then interact with to start to form your antibodies, to start to form antibodies to the virus itself. One of the things that we battle, and I know there'll be more talk about vaccine hesitancy as we go along, but one of the large reasons that people give, one of the main reasons is because of how quickly this vaccine was developed. So I'd like to just talk a little bit about how this vaccine was developed so quickly, which seemed like a miracle in itself, but it has a lot of good reasons for how this could come about. One of the main hurdles that vaccines have in development is funding. And there was a global effort to create the funding to get this vaccine out quickly. So there was readily supported from our government, many governments throughout the world. US government supported this initial effort with greater than $10 billion. There was also parallel processing that happened, meaning that the trials happened at the same time it was being developed. Trials were happening. So it wasn't that it had to get developed first, show some efficacy, but people were actually already starting to manufacture this at the same time, knowing that this had a good chance of being efficacious. There's also continuous review of the data. We didn't wait till the trial was done to start looking at, but there was transparency in the process and continual review that was happening with the safety by the FDA. In addition, we were able to build on knowledge we already had in past outbreaks in MERS and SARS. We had a good idea of coronaviruses and possible targets. Really looking at that spike protein was just a very tempting target to go after. The mRNA as a mechanism had also already been looked at to try to treat diabetes insipidus. And this was using it to produce vasopressin. The one complication that we had is that it wouldn't be stable enough and the effect wasn't lasting. And so that's really where the advancement happened in this. In addition, we had this global effort where as soon as the Chinese scientists were able to sequence the genome, they went ahead and shared that as early as January of 2020. This really sped up that process for being able to develop the vaccine. And then this was a collaborative effort where people were much more willing to share their advances with each other rather than staying proprietary. And then we have this continued real-time monitoring that allows us to advance this to the public quicker, where we're constantly monitoring the safety data using a couple of devices. One is the vSafe, which is a CDC application, which we have people download onto their phone, and they can report their symptoms in real time, and this is reviewed. We also have the continued reporting mechanism of the VAERS, or the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. These have already reported out for the last month of our administration of the vaccine from the middle of December to the middle of January in a recent report on the MMWR. And the good news is that really the signals that we're seeing are very much reflected in what was seen in the studies, and that there still seems to be a very good safety profile for these vaccines. This slide is just a review of how our vaccines tested, just because I know a lot of people use these phases, phase 1, 2, 3, and 4. Really what we do is on phase 1, we look to see, is the vaccine safe? That's the first question we want to ask. Is there any adverse events? The next question is, does it look like it could be effective? Is there any reason to continue with trying to develop this vaccine? And then the third one is the one where we do this large population study. And the part that we did with these vaccines is we did the phase 2-3 together to really advance the development of the vaccine. And phase 4 is really what we're in right now, where we continue to monitor once the vaccine is in implementation. So for the 2 mRNA vaccines that we have developed and are out on the market right now, this is the Pfizer and the Moderna. You can see the EUA was established on 12/13 for the Pfizer and quickly after that for the Moderna. And here just breaks down the 2 phase 3 trials as they were when the EUA was requested. And the Pfizer, you can see that there was quite a good efficacy of 52% after the first dose and 95% by the second dose. Further studies have looked at this and seen that actually Pfizer can have up to an 80% efficacy with 1 dose alone. In this study, over 43,000 people were enrolled at 150 clinical sites. 39 of those were in the US, and you can see the distribution by race and ethnicity and age here. Moderna similarly had a very good efficacy at 94% after the second dose, with over 30,000 people enrolled in this trial. So these are very large numbers. These are the common side effects that were reported during these trials. As you can see, the Moderna list is longer. It's not really because they didn't see these as signals on here on the Pfizer. I just did not list them all out. As you can see, one of the things that we have noticed too is that often there are more side effects that people do feel with the Moderna. My theory on that is the Moderna is a double dose vaccine. It's double concentrated. So I think that people often will feel this immune response that they're having to the vaccine stronger. So what are some precautions that the CDC has recommended in administering these vaccinations? As you can see with this table, this is a really nice triaging table. It allows us to kind of quickly look to see if people should or should not get the vaccine, or if we should have a further observation time. The largest proportion of people that we consider whether they should or should not have the vaccine has to do with the allergies. So this is a very large column down here where it's specifying if you have a food allergy or an allergy that it's not one of the components of the vaccine. If this is a rash or some kind of minor allergy, it really is a 15-minute observation. There's no contraindication. People should feel comfortable proceeding with the vaccine. If they have an anaphylaxis to any injectables or medications or food, then we will watch them for 30 minutes in our respite period of time. And then if they have any history of anaphylaxis to one of the components of the vaccine itself, or to the vaccine, prior administration of the vaccine, they're contraindicated for further considerations for vaccine at that time without a consultation with the allergist, immunologist, and then considerations of risk benefits for that patient. Also, the other areas that sometimes people ask about are if I'm immunocompromised, pregnancy and lactation. And there has been more studies that have been coming out about the immunocompromised host, particularly in the solid organ transplant patients who have shown that it's been safe in this population. So we are getting some more information about that and the safety profile. The one place that is still under investigation is the pregnancy and lactation. And that really is just because not sufficient numbers of people have been studied to definitively weigh in on the risk benefit profile. However, most recommendations at this time are given the fact that we do know that there's quite a bit of complication with people who are pregnant who do get COVID-19, that we recommend proceeding with vaccination this time, considering that the benefits are likely going to outweigh the risks. These are the components of the 2 vaccines. And the thing that we most highlight for risk for allergic reaction has to do with this PEG. And this is a component that we often see in bowel preparations. So if you've had to have a colonoscopy, this is a common component of that preparation that you've had to drink. Some people do have an allergy to this component itself, and that in itself would be a contraindication. The rest of them are really have to do with salts and sugars. The mRNA itself, people are not allergic to. So one of the challenges that we've had run into in this country has been the distribution challenges. And I think this really speaks to our appreciation of logistics, which I don't know if we had a full appreciation to how important logistics or organizations such as FEMA are to dealing with mass events. But this is a very difficult logistical challenge for us to distribute some of these vaccines. One of the main concerns has been the limited unpredictable allocations. So it's hard to predict whether if you're only going to get a couple doses or 5,000 doses, how to prepare for that. This is one of the challenges that the state and the federal government have been trying to overcome, and we are beginning to get more consistent numbers, and they're very aware that this is difficult for planning purposes for administration. One of the other challenges has been the cold storage, which you may have heard of. The Pfizer has required this ultra cold storage. New studies are coming out that suggest that we may not have to maintain that ultra cold storage for as long, which would help a great deal. It had been recommended that you maintain a -80 to -60. You can then move it to the refrigerator for 5 days, but then once you dilute it, it's only good for 6 hours. And again, the Moderna has similar, but not quite as cold of storage requirements. They require just a freezer, and then you can refrigerate up to 30 days. And then once diluted, you again have that 6-hour window. For the 2 vaccines, currently there's a 2-dose requirement of 21 days and 28 days. So that requires a return visit, which needs to be scheduled. And again, I think that these dosing regimens of 21 to 28 days will be further delineated as we get more studies coming out and more data on exactly how long these need to be spaced out. And then, of course, the high cost of the vaccine. It's a very expensive vaccine to produce. The next vaccine class that we are beginning to see is the Oxford AstraZeneca, which was approved in the UK, and then the Johnson & Johnson, which, as we know, is very close and under investigation right now for EUA. The exciting part about these vaccines is they're much easier to mass produce. They're much cheaper at around $4 instead of the high price of the mRNA vaccine. The vaccine can be stored, transported, and for at least 6 months at regular refrigerator temperatures. And the average efficacy is anywhere from 62% to 77%. And I know that some of that has changed with some of the strains, but it still has very good efficacy and is showing to be very good at preventing severe disease. And the AstraZeneca had required a 2-dose at 12-week interval. That was beginning to change. And the J&J, the nice thing about the Johnson & Johnson is it is a single dose and does not require that repeat visit. There we go. So this is just a little schematic on the different mechanism of those vaccines. And those are a traditional vaccine in that they require this is an adenovirus or kind of a vehicle that they put they put the protein inside this. This is injected into the patient, and then the DNA will produce the antibodies, the antigen for the antibodies to be triggered. The nice thing about this is when you use that vehicle, such as the deactivated adenovirus, it provides the stability for the vaccine. So it is more stable, as you've seen the challenges with the mRNA vaccine. The other thing I wanted to touch base on this talk was the new variants. And there are a couple more variants that are beginning to show up. And as a whole, here in the United States, we're beginning to do a great deal more surveillance of this. And this is becoming a more organized effort. And we do have the new variant of the B117 that we do have seen in our wastewater here in Bend. So we know that we have this strain circulating at some level in Bend already. And we think that it's been circulating in the US for some time. This has an increased transmissibility and initially was thought to not have any increased severity over the more common strain that we have here in the United States. However, we're now seeing some indications that there may be some increased mortality from this strain. The difference for most of these strains has to do with either 1 to 2 deletions on the spike protein. And this has the potential to change the efficacy of the vaccine, as we have seen with AstraZeneca and the strain that's found in Africa, that this has decreased some of its efficacy from around 60-70% to around 50%. However, it has still been very good at, again, decreasing severe disease and hospitalizations. And I know there'll be some discussion about how we are distributing the vaccine here in Oregon. This is the latest allocation distribution the OHA has put up, and I just grabbed that off of their website, which is available on their website at all times. And I recommend whenever there's kind of questions that come up about who is next to go there, because I would say this has been a moving target. And I think you can see that there's still a box here to be determined where we get to the critical workers, which are, of course, a lot of the people who are working in our service industry here in Bend. And that has not really been delineated yet, how this is going to be distributed out into that population. So that's to be determined. We currently at the fairgrounds have moved into the 70 plus population. So we're down into group 4 here with our distribution. I think many of you may know here at Bend, we were exceeding our groupings and going through these groups very quickly, because we obtained a large allocation that allowed us to do that. We started our efforts here in Deschutes County in the Tri-Counties, and we started that really in the middle of December when we first got large allocations allocated of Pfizer to the hospital. And this was to be directed according to OHA's guidance to our hospital staff and to try to maintain the functioning of the hospital to serve our population. And so that was our first challenge, was really distributing it to our caregivers and coming up with a line for our caregivers. And then once we started getting through that population, we still had enough doses to start then distributing out to our community, and particularly hitting our 1A population, urgent care providers. And then we moved into dentists and chiropractors and everybody that was really maintaining the health services for our community. And we were doing that in a community clinic at our Bend hospital site. After that, we did realize that if we were able to efficiently distribute vaccine, that's really what the state was looking for. So we ramped up our efforts to try to be even more efficient, and really joined up forces with county and moved out to the fairgrounds to broaden our distribution ability. And that's when we really began to ramp up our production. And we were able to administer up to 2,500 vaccines a day out there. And I think on Friday, we're scheduled for over 3,000. So that's a really exciting effort that's been a joint venture with county, the Deschutes County, really Tri-Counties targeted, and St. Charles and the National Guard, who's been out there also supporting us. This is the latest dashboard that we have out from the fairgrounds. I pulled that up from today just to kind of give you some numbers and where we're at currently with our distribution efforts out there. As you can see, these are individual administrations. These aren't, individual encounters. So they're each patient and not immunization numbers. So we've given out 2 shots for some of these patients. But you can see that we're close to 30,000 administered out there at the fairgrounds alone. And the part that I'm super excited about is this 75 plus grouping here, that we are now close to 16,000 of our 75 plus within the Tri-Counties that have been immunized. This is another dashboard that we look at daily here at St. Charles. It looks at our COVID positives, but also cumulative vaccine administered to date. And you can see this is not just individual people, but this is vaccine doses that have been administered. So a very large number here of almost 42,000 administered doses to date. And then the other really exciting part of this chart right here is the percentage who have at least reached one vaccination within our Tri-Counties area. And this is up to 15%. And I was meant to check before I got on, but not that we're competitive, but our Tri-Counties area, we have been one of the leaders in the state for percent vaccinated of our population. So very exciting for us. And at least for me, as a healthcare provider, I was most excited to get to the population of 75 plus, because I think as most people know, over 75%, I think around 77% of our deaths are in this population. So when we're really talking about doing life-saving advancement, this is what we're talking about, is getting to that population and really saving lives and saving people getting hospitalized with severe disease. So at that, I'll leave you with our slogan, which is don't hesitate, just vaccinate. And I will turn it over. Thank you.
Unmute myself, and thank you, Dr. Murray. That was really a lot of really great information. Next up, we have Nahad Sadr Azuri. And Nahad is, again, the Director of Public Health for Deschutes County. He's going to share a few things about really what's going on the ground. He is working with a partnership of many organizations, including this Chamber of Commerce, to educate folks and take the question marks out of whether or not you should get the vaccine. And also to talk about some of the progress we've made on getting through to essential workers, on attitudes and barriers, and also the overall goal of Deschutes County Health Department has in making sure that they make vaccination convenient for business community members, essential workers, et cetera, really trying to dispel any misinformation and get information out, get the vaccine out, and get as many people with the shots in their arms as possible. So Nahad, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. Go ahead.
Thanks, Katie. You just gave the presentation, in fact, so appreciate that. It was thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I'm Nahad, Director of Public Health. Cynthia, that was a really great presentation, and your last slide was a fantastic segue into this presentation, so thanks for putting that in. So let me start off by, the title of my presentation is COVID-19 Vaccine Confidence. And let me start off by mentioning something that my mentor told me when I was in graduate school. And he said that, now, if you want to do important work, then work on important problems. And I believe that we really have an important challenge and problem in front of us with COVID vaccine uptake and hesitancy in particular. As Cynthia, I hope you can see my screen, by the way. As Cynthia beautifully explained, we have really great products out there. And it's just really miraculous that in such a accelerated time period, we were able to, based on the information that she gave and the reasons for us being able to accelerate this process, we were able to have 2, 3, 4 products in the market, despite the challenges that we were facing. So certainly we have a great product out there. However, vaccines don't necessarily equate vaccination, which is the process of getting vaccines into people. In other words, we can't rely on if you build it, they will come mindset in this case. As Katie alluded, we are hoping to achieve an 80% population immunity. And this marker, frankly, could change. It really depends on many factors out there, including what we're seeing from the variant and the evolution of the virus as we proceed, and how transmissible it's going to be, and so on and so forth. But for now, I think most experts agree that around 80% of the eligible population getting vaccinated can help with interrupting the virus transmission. And frankly, I don't think we're going to get rid of this virus totally. I think what we're going to end up facing is a situation that we are facing with flu vaccine, with flu virus every year. So it's going to be some seasonality to it, most likely. That's my impression so far from the behavior that I'm observing. So that's a tremendous challenge, trying to reach 80% population immunity, vaccinating a whole lot of people in our Tri-County area and Deschutes County, especially when earlier surveys showed the intents and the attitudes of people behind vaccine uptake, the COVID vaccine uptake. Around 55% of those surveyed in December, actually, we undertook in November, December, in anticipation of emergency use authorization, we undertook a community-wide survey, and we learned that around 55% of the community members were likely to get vaccinated when they were asked, would you get vaccinated when this vaccine becomes available? So 55% is, and that's intent. Of course, that could change. Nevertheless, that's well below the 80% mark that we're trying to reach. And maybe it's a good time right now to kind of pause and make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of the language that we're using. Why are people hesitant? And there are many terminologies around this. You may have heard vaccine acceptance, vaccine confidence, reluctance, hesitancy. Frankly, different organizations and people use different terminologies. But bottom line, what we're referring to, and this is something that's highlighted by the World Health Organization in a key report they produced in 2014, is that any delay in vaccine acceptance or complete refusal due to various reasons that we're going to cover in this presentation. So any delay in vaccine acceptance or complete refusal, despite vaccines being available, is what we're referring to in terms of vaccine hesitancy or vaccine acceptance. This publication that I mentioned earlier highlights that vaccine hesitancy occurs on a continuum or a spectrum between high vaccine demand that you see on the right and complete vaccine refusal. So in other words, and this is really important, when we talk about vaccine hesitancy or vaccine delay or reluctance, we're really not talking about a binary phenomenon here, yeah? Where we cannot categorize people into being anti-vaccines or pro-vaccines. Even myself, for various reasons, at times have delayed vaccine uptake for my kiddos, and I can get into those at some stage. So it's really more fluid and complex, this vaccine hesitancy topic and discussion. And a substantial number of people fall in the middle of this spectrum with a sort of a wait and see approach. And our aim as public health and as community members, as business owners and members, is really to help people move toward the right, towards vaccine demand. And just maybe to put more context to this, also according to the World Health Organization, a range of factors, including what people think, feel, the social processes, motivation, and even practical issues can influence whether a person gets vaccinated or not. And that's really important because these are all sort of determinants of vaccine hesitancy. And for simplicity's sake, what we're seeing in various publications is that all of those different factors I mentioned earlier are simplified into these 3C model, or the determinants of vaccine hesitancy, which revolve around confidence, and this is really the trust for the vaccine or lack thereof, compliance, or complacency, which really touches on level of risk perception. as vaccine preventable diseases continue to decrease because of the success of vaccines being available and vaccination uptake, we obviously see less of a disease. And with less of a disease, our risk perception changes. So complacency is another determinant for vaccine hesitancy, and convenience. And this is where I think demand and supply overlap quite a bit. And I think Cynthia did a great job of talking about the logistics around it. And frankly, how convenient we make vaccine uptake determines whether we delay vaccination uptake or not, or even sometimes not doing it. So that's another determinant, the 3C model: confidence, complacency, and convenience. So in December, just as the EUA, or the emergency use authorization around Pfizer vaccine was coming out, we realized that this issue is really too important and too complex for us to try to deal with individually. So in December 2020, we created the Central Oregon Vaccine Confidence Coalition. Again, as an acknowledgement and understanding that vaccine hesitancy is complex, and it will require a multi-pronged and collaborative approach to address and overcome it. So this group that was put together, and the next slide shows who the members of this group, is really looking at employing innovative, evidence-based, equity-informed, and these are all critical words that we're using: innovative, evidence-based, and equity-informed strategies and interventions to address confidence and complacency and convenience, with the aim of increasing vaccine uptake and coverage in our communities. This group comprises various groups, sectors, stakeholders in our communities, many of which are reflected here, from academia, from community-based organizations, Chamber of Commerce, an important partner for us, faith-based organizations, private providers, of course, including our colleagues from St. Charles, schools, and of course the Tri-County departments, health departments, and governments are part of this coalition, reflecting again the complexity of this issue and how important it is for all of us to work together towards addressing the vaccine hesitancy. Some of the I guess accomplishments or achievements thus far, really just very few I'd like to highlight is around the partnerships that we've developed in strengthening relationships, especially during times when we're all working remotely and miss that human touch, and bringing different groups together and connecting with them and learning from each other. I mean, I learned so much from, for example, the faith-based communities and their contributions to this discussion. So having that partnership and the energy around it has been really great. And from that energy, we were able to very quickly put together a strategic framework. And I want to give a shout out to my colleague, Sarah Hudson, who's been the brains and engines behind a lot of this work. And I just want to appreciate her publicly as well. So putting a strategic framework together, evidence-based, innovative, equity-informed framework, a set of tools and strategies that we can collectively employ to address these issues. A great deal of work is happening around mass media campaigns, stories, and promotional materials. But at the same time, really what we're trying to understand through surveys and other rapid assessments is understand the attitudes and the barriers that people might be facing in taking on this, uptaking this vaccine. So these are some of the issues that we've been working on since December. And as Cynthia covered in her slides, but I just want to go maybe to the right side of this slide. We're trying to be where I think we're at a point, maybe there is a blessing or silver lining in some of the delays in vaccines, because now we're able to catch up and be a little bit ahead in terms of the demand side. We know that the next group of folks that we will try to sort of take on in terms of vaccine distribution and uptake are the essential workers, the frontline workers, which is a subset of the essential workers. And we are already putting our energy and focus around understanding their behaviors, their intents, their attitudes, the barriers and challenges that they're facing or might be facing as we move forward, so that we can systematically address them to the best of our abilities collectively as a group of stakeholders, so that once vaccines do become available, we are in a better position for vaccine uptake. Some of the rapid assessments show that, frankly, we see around more than 70, close to 80% of those that were surveyed show somewhat likely and majority very likely that they would take the vaccines when they become available. This is not a scientific survey, though, compared to the earlier one I mentioned. This is more of a rapid assessment for us to get some quick data so we could start building our framework around it. Nevertheless, it's a good starting point, and it's one that we can build upon. We also found that from this rapid assessment that increased interest over time has gone up since earlier on. There are concerns around the newness of the vaccine. So the presentation that, for example, Cynthia gave is really helpful in building the understanding around the newness of the vaccine. And there is a desire for more information. Let me just pause for a minute and say that if you're wondering who constitutes essential workers and frontline workers, well, you're not alone. We're also trying to get a good definition, operational definition around essential workers and frontline workers. And there are some that are circulating. One from the advisory group to CDC called ACEP defines frontline workers as a subset of essential workers and likely at greatest risk of work-related exposure, for example. What I do know is that OHA, Oregon Health Authority, is working on an operational definition around essential workers. And I think by next week or the week after, it should be released. And that can really help us then with the sequencing as we move forward and with our targeted interventions. Most likely, these groups will reflect those working in manufacturing, construction, facilities, food services, groceries, warehouse, distribution, and so on. But that's something that we're going to have more clarity around in a couple of weeks. Anyway, some of the things that we learned, because it's relevant to the business community, is that a large number of percentage of folks really are comfortable with getting their vaccine at work, which speaks to the convenience around but as far as vaccine hesitancy determinant, the convenience as part of the 3C model, it speaks to that. And we should really do our best as business owners and as business community to make it as convenient as possible for our employees to uptake this vaccine. And that could be the location, it could be the days of the week or the hours of the day, and consideration around, frankly, childcare responsibilities. So I think Emily is going to touch on this more, and I don't want to steal her thunder. What could our business community do? And Emily, if you're going to cover these, then I'll just give you the floor, or I can just mention quickly. Is it a part of your slides?
Go ahead and just go for it.
Okay. Certainly, we encourage our business community to be part of the solution here. We really want to listen to you. We want to learn from you, and we really want you to be engaged in co-creating the solutions with us and be part of this process. And some of the low-hanging fruit, frankly, is that some of the senior leaders in our business communities could be vaccine champions and be role models for your employees, frankly. Making sure that we are sharing key messages and resources about vaccines with our employees, sharing stories, and we can certainly help with that. Considering ways to make it as convenient as possible for our employees to uptake the vaccine, and really listen to the best of it. We all can listen, no matter what our jobs are, what our titles are, what our expertise are. We can all be better listeners and engage with people who have questions and concerns around the vaccines. I have to check myself all the time to make sure that I'm not judgmental with with anyone when it comes to anything, but frankly around vaccine hesitancy. There are legitimate concerns there, and often 90% of times those legitimate concerns can be addressed by just listening to them. So I would encourage everyone to take that approach. With that, again, thank you for inviting me, and I give the floor back to Katie.
Thanks so much, Nahad. Really great information. And it's good to spread correct information about this vaccine to as many people as possible, to make as many folks willing to get the shot if they have the opportunity as quickly as we can. Emily Freeland from the county, you want to wrap up for us? You're on mute. Yep.
Okay, here we go. Can everyone see my screen? Yeah, okay. Okay, so I'm going to fly through some of this. Dr. Marie and Nahad have given some great information, and I think there's some overlap between all of our things, but we would all probably say that it's always good to hear things multiple times. It helps them sink in, and hearing them in different ways from different people are also helpful. So like Nahad mentioned, I mean, we hope that you all will be champions for the vaccine and what it means for our community, and really think through all the positive things. We all have we know that business has been really affected this whole year, and it's really hard to listen to some of those stories. I think we've all heard them, and we're really, really hopeful that as this vaccine rolls out and our numbers continue to decline, we hope that we can kind of get back to quote unquote business as usual, although it will always be different, I think. So the first thing I just wanted to share was this little slide about vaccine distribution. I think that, you know, we're all working through, we thought it would be an easy, or often people think, you know, A, B, C, get the vaccines in the arms and we'll go through. I thought this was just a really, really good like visual about how complicated it is. And we've seen in the last week, there's another huge effort, which is the weather, that's not on this at all, that's really affected how many vaccines we can give. And that happens both locally with actually getting people to the clinic and rescheduling that way, but also nationally and getting the vaccine here. So this kind of just shows us a little bit about how the vaccination works. And I like to share this because this is a kind of like those logistical questions I often get from business owners. They want to know, like, what is the process and how does this work here locally? So basically, we get allocations from the state or the federal government, and then those are pushed out to hospitals, pharmacies, enrolled providers, and local public health, and then it goes to all of these different groups. So we are in the process, like Nahad and Dr. Marie just shared. You know, we've all seen that kind of slide or those graphics where we see who gets to go first and who gets to go second. Sometimes that might not seem fair, but it's really based on everyone's best job of, you know, really targeting the people that we know need it the most, and then moving through our population in an equitable way, whether you live in Portland or in Harney County or somewhere else in the state that you're able to get the vaccine at the same point. So there's kind of two different distribution models, and we're using kind of a mix of those. One is the centralized model with the max vaccination clinics, like Dr. Marie mentioned. We can get a lot of people through really quickly. So I think on Friday we have almost 3,000 people scheduled, which is awesome. You get all of those, you know, people that can access that can move through there quickly. But we all know that there leaves a lot of gaps. So there's people who can't access that for whatever reason. So we also want to have these more non-centralized models. So using those clinics, pop-up vaccination sites, which we've done some of those like down in Lapine for the seniors down there who can't make it to the mass vaccination clinic. We don't want to forget all of those people. And we think about the same thing with workplace type clinics, possibly in the future, for targeting some of those populations once we have that vaccine available. So, you know, there's pros and cons of both of these. The biggest to the centralized is we have the efficiency of scale. There's less waste, and there's less input of resources per dose. Whereas you have that non-centralized, it takes a little bit more effort to get that done, but we can make sure that we get everybody who wants to get vaccinated that vaccine to those people. So I think the supply chain is one of the most difficult things. And like we've said, we're trying to forecast ahead and make plans and schedule people and get them into the vaccination clinic or to their primary care provider, or all these different mechanisms by which people might be able to actually get a vaccine. But that can be really difficult. And like I mentioned before, early on when we had really high vaccination rates, our supply was coming in really quickly. We might have got a little bit of ahead of some other places in the state. And so to even that out, we got less vaccine for a short amount of time. It wasn't a punishment, but it was, again, to make sure that those group 1A, if you lived in Portland, could still get that, where we weren't moving on to the other groups down, way lower in the priority list before those other people had the opportunity to get vaccinated. We want to make sure that everyone also understands, and this is a question I get a lot, is like, if I go to the Costco pharmacy or pharmacies start to have this, do I get to jump ahead in line if I'm a client of that pharmacy? And the answer to that is no. So no matter where we're getting the vaccine, whether it's our clinic or the mass vaccination clinic or public health or a pharmacy, at this point, everyone has to follow that priority distribution. So we can't suddenly have a 50-year-old who has, is not a medical provider get the vaccine ahead of someone else because they went to the Costco pharmacy. So a lot of questions I'm getting around are can we require a vaccination as an employer? And the short answer to that is yes. But as we all know, it's a lot more nuanced than that, and it's not necessarily something that we would recommend. So there's certain categories of workers who you cannot require a vaccine for, and that includes healthcare workers in the state of Oregon. We also don't think that that's necessarily the way to get the most people wanting to get the vaccine, right? We want people to choose to get the vaccine, understand why it's a safe and effective mechanism to protect themselves. And that's probably more effective than, requiring the vaccine, which causes a lot of hesitancy just in of itself. So if you decide to think about implementing some of this, we really, really, really recommend you use resources like BOLI and EEOC. I will send these slides to Katie and she can share them out, has the links there. It is very complicated, and you also probably need to consult with a lawyer before you do something like that. So the other thing is, or not. So if we don't require it, how can we, help as an employer or as a business, making it easy for our employees, whether they're whatever tier, like Nahad, what is the definition of an essential worker? That's still, being decided at a level that's not ours, but how do we remove those barriers and make it easy? So we would love to partner with people as we move on. Like we said, if we have the ability to offer clinics or go on site, or there's other mechanisms by which pharmacies can come on site for you and help you vaccinate workers at your location, that's a really good idea. Another idea that I've seen, and we saw this work in long-term care facilities, was, opting out is totally fine, but a lot of times the barrier is, like, if there's a clinic on Saturday morning and I'm kind of on the fence and I can either stay in bed or I have to get up and go to the clinic and get my vaccine there, I'm probably going to choose to stay in bed if I'm sort of on the fence, if I don't see the real benefit to it, and 2 hours of sleep sounds better. So if you have people that are meeting with a clinician, or basically they have to be face-to-face with someone who has the needle in hand in order to opt out, that's one of those mechanisms by which probably more people would end up vaccinated. There's other incentives you could offer. Again, it's really important that you look into the legalities of those. If you're brainstorming and you think, oh, this seems like a really good idea, we want to make sure that it doesn't result in some sort of pay differential between people that are vaccinated and those are not, especially if the people are opting out because of like medical reasons, like they're allergic or something else. You certainly don't want anything like that. So there's also considerations that I've heard a lot of questions around, around the administration. So because we know that there are these side effects and some people don't feel great after, you want to think about when, especially if you have a large clinic, when your staff is being vaccinated. So staggering those schedules or having multiple clinics where people can go on different days, recommending that people get the vaccination the day before a weekend or their regular scheduled days off. Allowing vaccination during work time is really a good idea. So, you know, a lot of people in my field, I've heard them say, I really hoped that I had I felt like fever and had those side effects because it means the vaccine is working in my body, right? Like that's an indicator to me that there's an immune response, which is what we want to know that we're having this immune response. Not everyone in the general population feels that way, but we do expect that there is, like Dr. Marie showed, significant side effects or measurable side effects for a lot of different people. So once your employees are vaccinated, or at least some portion of them hopefully are, you know, what are the benefits to you? And I mean, I think that we can talk about vaccine hesitancy, but then there's the practical things that you think of as an employer. And we've worked through a lot of these, like who needs to quarantine, who has to isolate, all of those kind of continuity of operations. I think I've probably been on here and seen Katie more than she would like, but we want to think about the fact that there are going to be less illness. You're going to have less sick people out. If you do have someone that's does not get vaccinated or gets COVID and they were at the workplace, other workers have less need to quarantine because they may be immune from getting the vaccine. Again, the details around this are pretty complicated, like most of the things, but we'll help you work through those situations as they arise, how people show you that they're vaccinated once the time comes. And then we really want to think about community immunity. So getting to the point where we can get kind of back to that normal work and normal things. So again, access issues and questions, get tons of questions around this. We would really recommend the best place to go is to this vaccine interest form. It's our local best way that we send out information. So if you have older adults in your family or other people that are having difficulty, signing up for them as well so you can get information and share it directly with them by phone is another thing. We have one phone line for COVID questions and the vaccine hotline. So anyone can call that number with, I was exposed type questions, like we've been saying this whole time, or vaccine questions. And we really encourage you to fill that out because that's our best local source of information about where and how to get the vaccine. Again, it's a partnership between St. Charles and the health department. And that's all I had. So I sped through as quickly as I could. I know we were a little bit behind, but hopefully there's a couple minutes to answer some questions.
Thanks, Emily. We have about 4 minutes left and a lot of questions in the queue. So I'm going to ask these and let's see how many we can get to. Many questions from seniors. And folks I know in general, my parents included, who have been trying to sign up. It's very, very difficult. Is there any easier way for seniors that is directly to them rather than, for example, the question is, can I go and register and will I be contacted and scheduled at that time? And then what happens if you have to cancel or if you have a spouse that wants to come with you? Can you tell us how all that's working with seniors?
So I can speak to this just a little bit. And again, because we're trying to go through this max vaccination and scheduling, we have two options basically. The easiest way to schedule when it is your turn is to schedule, and we can send out the link. There's a scheduling link that you can click on and you'll be able to schedule through that. The secondary mechanism is calling the hotline, and those people can help seniors or other people that have access issues to schedule directly on that phone line. So as most people might imagine, our volume of calls went way up. At one point, I think we had 2,500 messages in one day. So that was an incredibly difficult thing to kind of handle. But we have since staffed up and we have a lot more people dealing with that. Again, partnership between the health department and St. Charles to really help both people's schedule. Again, the easiest way to schedule is directly on this website that Dr. Marie brought up. But if people are having difficulty with that, there is a secondary mechanism to do that.
Okay. Dr. Marie, I think this might be for you. it looks like we're getting both vaccines. Are you changing which vaccine you're getting and administering? Is there a problem or a challenge with getting second doses? How are you vacillating between the Pfizer and the Moderna?
Yeah, that's a good question. We're actually, whatever we get, we administer. So we usually get a mixture of both. Whenever your appointment comes up, it's just whatever we're administering that day. We do make sure you get the same product for your second dose, and that's scheduled as you leave the clinic. So you will have a scheduled appointment for your second dose as you leave, and that will be for the same product that you got the first dose for. We're just doing mixed dose clinics, like whatever we get. And when we get Johnson & Johnson, I'm sure we'll be rolling that in the mix too. Yeah.
Right. Great. So I want to thank the panelists. They're going to take a shot at trying to answer all of these questions because I know this is high anxiety for a lot of folks who have been trying to get information. And so they've agreed to answer your questions. And we'll do that in the follow-up, and you'll receive a link to that as well. But I do want to close with one more. Let me see. Lots of questions around, so what if you fall below the 65 and older, when we see a lot of the US statistics saying when you're 60 and above, it's accounting for over 70% of deaths. So the definition of a senior, and how quickly, I guess the question is, how quickly will we be able to get to folks below 65 who may be caregivers for older Americans, or whatever reason, how quickly will we be working down this list?
So that, maybe I could take a stab at that. I wish I had a date that I could share with everyone. Basically, it's driven by vaccine supplies, right? That's the main constraint here. I think in Deschutes County in Central Oregon, all the partners have done a great job of putting the different pillars in place so that once vaccines become available, they're immediately administered. So from what we're hearing at the federal level is that it seems quite positive with vaccine supply of existing vaccines and the ones that are in the pipeline. And it looks like it's going to ramp up quite fast in the coming weeks. I'm hopeful that by May, June, we have vast majority of those who want to be vaccinated. And now, of course, I know I'm going on record and saying something that I'm going to regret later, but I tend to be an optimist, and I think we have a good opportunity to vaccinate Central Oregonians as we enter summertime.
Well, I really want to thank all three of you for being here today. We could talk another hour about this. And I just want to acknowledge there are a lot of folks out there who are really wanting to get this vaccine. And I hope you get it as quickly as possible, and that the supply is able to meet our demand. And we can all get back to normal-ish sooner rather than later. So everyone be safe out there. I want to thank our sponsor, Ben Broadband, one more time. And please look for the link that we're going to be sending you later with the answers to your questions. Thanks so much for joining us today.